Dear members, welcome to the online event here at the Foreign Policy Society. My name is Flindt Pedersen. I'm the director of the Danish Foreign Policy Society. Several months have passed since the outbreak of the new coronavirus, and COVID-19 has already impacted enormously on the global economy, on the politics, and on our societies around the world. So in the coming months, the Danish Foreign Policy Society will have a focus on how does the coronavirus impact the different regions and countries of the world. So today I'm very pleased to have invited Konstantin Eggert to give us a brief on how the pandemic has affected Russia and the Russian society, economy, and political leadership. So before we start, allow myself to make a short introduction of Konstantin. Konstantin Eggert has a very impressive CV. He's an independent journalist, political analyst, and communications consultant. Today he's based in the Baltic states and he's correspondent for Deutsche Welle, Germany's international broadcaster, and as well for the Russian digital media Snop.ru, as far as I understand. But apart from that, he has been a program host and political commentator for TV Rain. He's worked for Kommersant, Russia's oldest private media group, and he's also been the senior correspondent and editor-in-chief of BBC Russian service Moscow Bureau, and a lot of other things, also experienced in the Middle East and other things. So we are very proud and very happy to have you here, Konstantin, and that you would provide your information and knowledge to the members of the Danish Foreign Policy Society. So let me start by asking you the question. So what is actually the situation in Russia at the moment?
Well, the situation in Russia can't be assessed. First of all, Charlotte, thank you very much for the invitation. And that's what I should say first. I'm very grateful for that. And I hope that what I say in the Q&A session will be of use to you. I do not pretend to have a unique sort of view of that, but I think that of Russia, but I think that to some extent maybe it is very personal because until COVID outbreak, not only I was very frequently in Moscow, which is my birth town, but also I traveled quite extensively in Russian regions. I also can take a look at things from the perspective of, say, Baltic states and Northern Europe generally. So I do have different vantage points, or bell towers, as they say in Russia, kolokolny, from which I can take a look at the situation. So what you see in Russia today is something that can't be really, the problem is that you can't really independently verify what goes on. Because the suspicion is that the government is definitely, at least in public, playing down the scale of the pandemic and the problems that it faces. It is also clear that for now it's not the peak yet. And I think the issue is whether the peak will be a sharp one with a fall after that, or if it will be a very prolonged plateau with high numbers of people being sick and alas dying. I think the second scenario is going to put under huge strain the Russian health system. They may have to involve the army hospitals, and that hasn't been happening so far. But the problem is, I think, is that although the severity of the outbreak, if you look at it, is not yet percentage-wise as high or as the thing is not as severe as, say, in Italy or Spain, but it is exacerbated by incompetence, corruption, abject poverty that exists basically like 100 kilometers from Moscow already. It is also exacerbated by the government's desire to hush-hush any kind of links between the epidemic and China. And I would like to remind you that Russia has the longest, its longest border is with China, 4,100 or 200 kilometers. And this border is actually porous. I mean, it's the cross-border exchanges are huge. And the perception that there must be quite a lot of this stuff in the Far East is very, very strong. So far, the government seems to cope with this. But I think that what the pandemic has revealed is that, A, the pandemic did not change the patterns of behavior of the Putin regime that we saw before, i.e., it still continues to pump up propaganda about, Second World War and V-Day and the West and things like that. It still continues to pursue its police state tactics vis-a-vis the opposition. Not massively, it's still, as we call it, targeted repression, pinpointed repression. But it's there now, it's exacerbated by this basically very lax rules, because you can say that anything that anyone does with regard to criticism of the government is undermining collective effort to fight COVID-19.
Yeah, there's a new law. There's a new law that actually can give you up to 5 years of prison if you criticize or provide fake news.
Exactly. And also, and that's very interesting and sad, is that actually this morning there was news, or there is information that the police will be given extraordinary powers to basically open any car without any kind of court order or things like that. It can break into any apartment, and it can use weapons in case it feels it's threatened. And when it happens in the US, we know that there are really courts supervising that. In Russia, courts are just one of the several instruments of the state. So I think that this particular thing has shown that what the government fears most is actually massive disturbances stemming from either massive infection or social discontent, poverty, joblessness, and things like that, or probably both. So this fear of panic and fear of social explosion are the two things that are driving the Putin regime now in terms of its policy. And I think that they're going to continue to determine what happens with regard to the pandemic. I will probably stop here.
Mm. And so how has Putin actually, has he managed so far? Has been he had some pet projects in the beginning of the year, like the Victory Day, 75 years, where Macron was supposed to come, and there was also the new referendum on the constitution. So how has he been faring so far?
Well, he's not been faring too well, in my view, in my personal opinion. I think that Putin didn't show from the very beginning the resoluteness and the desire to act that one expects of a head of state of government in any country, but which is doubly expected from someone who's been pumping up his image as super global macho for the last 20 years. And it didn't happen. What we saw a distracted old man who was not really easily coming to grips with the situation until Mayor Sobyanin. And I think that he was told to do that by quite a few top-level government figures until he crashed, actually, Putin's office and told him that the situation is grave and one needs to act and forget about the V-Day parade and the constitutional vote, which are both still on the cards somewhere in the future. So Putin shown himself to be light, not particularly resolute, not particularly articulate, not very well versed in his own laws, because what he did, and there's a Russian interplay of words, he did not use the normal legal term of holiday to declare a holiday. He used a synonym which is called days off, but this is not a legal term. So what he actually did, he burdened the economy with an unofficial holiday, which at the same time is not a holiday, and that means that job givers, patrons, can actually fire their staff. But if they fire their staff, then they may be punished because, in theory, Putin ordered everyone to not only keep their workers on holiday, but also pay the workers. So that was a big blunder. And I also think that he is, if you wish, public persona during this crisis has really taken a hit. Because what we see someone holed up in some kind of whatever bunker or some very, very isolated, windowless study in which we've never seen him before, talking on kind of video links with the governors of government, and actually it's all staged. You see it, that it's all staged. It's all staged to show that Putin is in control. Now, a lot of people watching that on state TV channels may be deceived because they would want to be deceived, wouldn't they, in such circumstances? They want someone to rely on. I think that Putin's problem is that he's not deceiving the whatever passes for a political elite in Russia, the ruling class, the ruling clique. Because what happened is that in a moment of crisis, he was not there to save them. Mayor Sobyanin, Moscow Mayor Sergei Sobyanin, or even the Prime Minister, Mishustin, seemed to be more resolute and more in control of the situation than the president. What is also interesting is that he's super centralizing policy of basically appointing governors in Russia backfired. So for 16 years, since 2004, he's been appointing loyalists whose main quality is actually loyalty, not professionals. He had this, the whole policy of federalism was on manual control, on manual, as in a car, there was no automatic gearbox. So the presidential administration managed anything from Kaliningrad to the maritime region, the Far East, hands-on. So the governors were used to basically calling the Kremlin saying, do we have to have chicken or fish for lunch? And suddenly they're told, well, but you not only have to decide on your own whether you are going to have chicken or fish, but have to decide for the whole region what they're going to eat, how they're going to work, and things like that. And we're not going to give you any extra money for that. And that shows, I think there's quite a lot of apprehension in the regions with regard to that. Finally, what is important is that the government is not doing what everyone now knows, at least the businesses and middle classes, they know what Donald Trump is doing, what Boris Johnson is doing, what the European Union is doing, giving out money to businesses and sometimes to people. And that's not happening. Or what happens is incomparable to anything that happens in the EU, for example. And I think that also creates a problem. And it creates a problem because everyone understands that the government is sitting on huge reserves and it doesn't want to give them out because these are the last moment reserves, these are the doomsday reserves. And that basically produces an impression that the government is unsure of itself and unsure of the way the economy is going to develop. And rightly so, because of the conflict with the Saudis and this kind of complete falling out with OPEC. So let me put it like that. I think that although Putin will probably manage to survive this crisis, he will come out of it weakened. And not so much in the public eyes, although it will be also in extended sections of the public will be aware that Putin is not as strong and not as good. But I think it's mostly the ruling class that will figure out that it's dealing with someone who is past his sell-by date.
So let me recap. First of all, Putin's policy of centralizing government all over and moving away from a federal structure of the Russian Federation actually is backfiring, because the governors don't know what to do. They don't have any money. And they're just used to being loyal but not professional. That's one. Two, the fact that Putin has not given any money to the businesses such as Europe and is actually, and holding on to the reserves is also going to be backfiring. And then he's losing the confidence of the political elite. So even though he might hold on, he is in for major troubles. And then lastly, apparently the Sobyanin, the mayor of Moscow, and Mishustin, the prime minister of Russia, is actually doing better than Putin. So they're sort of outshining him.
True,
yeah.
True. I think so.
So, but you say at the same time that he's not in an immediate political crisis, but you might see that there might be a political crisis because he will lose the support of the political elite.
Yes, I think that the government's, let me put what you can figure out by watching the government action is that the government, and I talk to all the time, every day, I speak to people who are in the thick of things. Now, we all know now about the state of the Russian hospital and medical care better than we did in the last, 30 years. What is also interesting is that I speak to people who are sick. And let me tell you one thing. Together with my wife, we know, until today, we know 6 people who are relatives or friends of people who we know very well, and at least one person I met personally who died. So it's, I think, all in all 7. With that, if we know between the two of us so many people who died, or about so many people who died, it is inconceivable that the official government figures, which stand at a couple of hundred or something like that, I forgot what is the number today, that the official government figures are right. There are much more many deaths. They are probably masqueraded as, death from diabetes, and of course there are complications. And there are lots of complications in Russia that are not as heavily present in, say, Western societies like alcoholism. That's one thing. Another thing, I think the government strategy is very clear because of that. The government strategy is essentially herd immunity, I think. I think they realize they won't be able to treat everyone. It's very cynical, but I think they think, okay, fine, lots of pensioners will die. That's easier for the pension fund, which is actually, Russia is a country with very bad demographics. Number 3, we're not saving everyone. We're only saving either the big oligarchical holding structures with, steel mills where 50,000 people work, or people who are really poor. They are getting some money, some students. For example, my daughter suddenly received, 200 euros, give or take, but slightly less, from the government. She's a student, she's not really poor, but students do them. And I think that this, but everything in between, the middle classes, medium and small-sized businesses, fend for yourself. Oh, some tax breaks, 6 months, things like that, but generally fend for yourself. And I think there's a clear strategy. The oligarchs and these big industrial structures, they are important because they are the backbone of the Russian economy. The poor, that's Putin's majority. These are people who work for, who vote for Putin. Well, whatever passes for voting in Russia. It's not really voting, not really elections, but still. Also, these are people that can revolt in a certain moment. But they know middle class won't revolt. And all these kind of restaurant owners and gallery owners and the producers of plastic cups and, oh, you fend for yourselves. You were hiding your taxes from us. Anyway, now, if you didn't make your savings, it's not our problem. Now, that may work But the thing is that lots of these people, middle-class people, small and medium-sized business people who were not politicized, or probably who loved Putin, loved the Crimean annexation, loved all this kind of things, they will have a different view now because they were not helped in a moment of crisis, and that will linger. So I think that what we will see after that is not, I mean, I don't know, if this pandemic lasts for a year, all bets are off, or even 6 months. But if it doesn't, if we're talking about, let's say, 3-4 months, then of course the regime will emerge out of it. On the surface, it will be the same, but it will be weakened both externally and internally, because it already started to weaken before the crisis and before the pandemic, for one simple reason. Putin's been around for 20 years. The same face on television, saying the same things for 20 years, longer than Brezhnev. The only person he's trying to beat now is Stalin, 29 years. That impacts societies. You may be wonderful, you may be Saint Nicholas, but people get tired of you just because you've been around for too long. I think this particular trend will be exacerbated, and we'll see how the government will react to that. I don't think it has any answer but more police, more batons, more imprisonments.
And how about I also heard that the government is taking, surveillance technology into practice. How's that? Is that how people are acting to that?
Yeah, I mean, you have to understand all these things like QR codes and monitoring people via mobile phones and things like that. They have dual purpose, or even triple purpose. One is immediate. Yes, let us control citizens because there is danger. There is danger, no doubt about it. Number two, lots of people very close to the government, very close to FSB and FSO and so on and so forth, and making billions of rubles now, or hundreds of millions at least, on government contracts, completely non-transparent, to produce all this wonderful technology, which probably can be bought on the market for whatever, $500,000. Number three, it will not go away when COVID-19 goes away. So what Putin is developing, he is developing a proto-police state now, electronic police, 21st century police state. This kind of big brother for the future. And what I think will happen is that every single power that has been granted to the police or to FSB or whatever, to the Siloviki, that will remain, even when the pandemic goes. And I think that this will be probably good in the eyes of the government, but that will sharpen opposition to the government, because this touches not only on political activists and Navalny fans and so on. This touches upon unbelievably wide number of people, including those who actually were more or less supportive of Putin before. For example, religious fundamentalists who, in Orthodox Christianity, all these people that refuse to take their personal tax number because they think it's the number of the beast, they will not be glad to see these kind of QR codes and things like that. Already they are not. Same goes for, say, radical Muslims. Same goes for the tax-dodging middle classes, the service economy. I think that long-term, that will be a very, very big issue in Russia. And I think that's kind of digital freedom. That will be a very, very significant theme for the younger and more sort of 21st, not like old people like I am, but more like my children.
And how about the opposition? You could say the Navalny opposition. What are their reactions to everything taking place at the moment? They can't go. It's you can't go onto the street and demonstrate and
No.
so,
What they did, they banned. Mayor Sebanian banned any gathering of whatever, more than whatever number of people very, very early in the pandemic. Well, everyone is going digital now, and Navalny's been digital for many, many years now. His YouTube channel with millions of views, and his Twitter feed is 2+ million people, so followers. I think what happened is that Navalny started to move, and I think it's a very good thing, to move away from his very, very single-minded focus on corruption to making policy pronouncements. Let's not forget, he tried to become presidential candidate in 2018. So he's now starting to behave more as a politician. For example, he made this broadcast saying, we suggest 5 steps to help the economy, help small and medium-sized businesses, to help people. And that is basically like money distribution, of course. You can say it's populist, but in such times, okay, everyone is a populist. Most European governments are populist. So he's trying to grab attention of the public by doing what Putin doesn't do. That's a political act. I think that maybe Navalny's become too big to do something to him today, but I'm sure that I'm certain that the government will be watching and will be trying to wrong-foot him on the basis of him undermining collective efforts to fight the pandemic and finding pretexts. But I think that what they're trying to do, they're trying to offer an alternative strategy, which is really, really smart. I mean, that's what you should do. I mean, the effect of it is, how should I put it? I can't be sure about the effect. The core of Navalny supporters is there already. Whether he can expand, well, depends on how long he will be sustaining this image of a politician. Because Navalny's focus on corruption made him, in the eyes of many, a very good candidate to be a prosecutor general, but not president of Russia and prime minister. And I think that this should change in case he personally wants to play a role. He has a good team, has good economists there, but I think that generally the realization that after the pandemic, there needs to be some kind of coherent view of the future if the opposition wants to succeed. I think that this becomes more and more accepted.
I also saw the former Minister of Finance, Kudrin, saying that the economy will be reduced with 9%, which is quite a lot. Yeah. Even a not very big economy, but even 9% reduction. So that will, I guess, be a big blow to what's going on. And now we have the oil price going very much down also. So how do you see that? And how will I guess that people have already for several years experienced a reduction in their sort of purchasing power. So what is yeah?
I think you're right. I think that this crisis hits Russia after 5 is not actually 6 years now of continuous fall in real disposable incomes. Crimea or not, such things eventually have political consequences. What Kudrin said is right. I will add an interview given, I think 2 days ago, by the CEO of Sberbank, German Gref, who said, why the government is not giving out, he joked actually about it. He said, why the government is not giving out money to businesses and to people on a very wide scale. Well, it's like in the old army joke, he said. Why do we have to retreat? Give me 3 reasons. reason number one, we don't have any ammunition left. Well, he said, this is it. The government just doesn't have enough money. Now, whether that's true or not depends on how do you see the rescue package happening. How do you see the rescue package being distributed? The government has made a list of the so-called strategic or systemic businesses, which is also corrupt, because already people see that there are companies that belong to members of Putin's in-crowd that are being singled out for help. So the government is giving out help, but it's not helping the citizens. Helping the citizens in a very low-key way. That will have impacts, of course. But I also think that Putin suspects the situation may get much, much, much worse. And it's then that he'll be using the reserves. Now, with regard to the oil price, it is low. It would have been low anyway because of the global crisis, because of the slump in the global economy. But Putin, of course, exacerbated it by going to war with OPEC, with Igor Sechin, and losing it big time. What's even more important is that not only he basically lost a lot of income, but also that he lost trust. OPEC Plus, that he spent several years creating, courting the Saudis, to the chagrin of the Americans and the Iranians, that's gone. Putin is a cynic. He always believed that only naked interests matter. But now he has a very, very bitter taste of his own cynicism, because I don't think you can out-cynic MBS, number one. And number two, that is where trust is important. I worked in the Middle East for many years. A handshake there, a trust there, means much more than a piece of paper on which you write some kind of contract. Putin lost it, and he's not going to recoup it anytime soon. So let me put it like that. He definitely clings to his reserves for a much blacker date in the future, some possible Black Thursday or Black Monday or whatever it's going to be. But that means that he's constrained in his response to the pandemic. And I actually think if he said, well, you see, we can't cope, it's going to be herd immunity, but you'll have your work, you'll have your salaries, it will function. I think that probably he would have had more understanding than this fluctuation, neither this nor that. I suppose that, especially in the Russian regions, that already has consequences and will have it.
And how is the media actually, how are they, the official media, how are they addressing the situation? How are they trying to paint everything?
Well, first of all, they are producing an impression that everything's under control, which you would expect in such circumstances. Interestingly enough, they are not peddling anti-Western conspiracy theories about whatever, Bill Gates or the CIA being behind the virus as strongly as the Chinese do. But I think that also there is a margin of debate about, say, the state of the health system in Russia, because you understand that is what people would expect you to discuss on television. But still, the old bogeymen are there. There is still, of course, this really, really single-minded focus on V-Day, 9th of May, and things like that. The government media has been spending the last 10 days or 2 weeks even now castigating the Czech Republic for removing the statue of Marshal Ivan Konev in Prague, who did liberate Prague, but then he invaded Budapest, and then he was one of the commanders of the invasion of Czechoslovakia in 1968. So an inordinate amount of airtime spent on condemning the Czechs and talking about the glories of the war and things like that. And I also think that it's the state media has a lot to answer for, because at the beginning of the pandemic, I saw several chat shows where the presenters were saying, well, it's just a flu, isn't it? How many people are infected? Whatever. Okay, even in Italy, which suffers, it's still a ridiculous percentage of population. So lots of people believe that from the beginning. Now they are scaling that back. But look, Russian media, for the Russian media, for state TV, state newspapers, whatever, nothing changed much. They were already competing with digital. And the government is also in the digital sphere. They are pushing their message there. So in this respect, let me put it like that, the situation didn't change much. I mean, those who wanted to watch Navalny TV and Navalny Live, it's called, they watched it. Those who wanted to watch Channel 1, they did watch Channel 1. But of course, also the inevitable happens. TV audiences are growing old. And that is an irreversible fact. It's older people that watch TV. So to some extent, that's good for Putin because they control people who vote for them But on the other hand, as young people grow and get politicized and become more involved in society life, their own worldview becomes more and more important, more and more prominent. And although Russia is a dying country with very bad demographics, this active minority of people who get their news and views from the web is growing numerically. So that will also have an impact. Already has an impact, but will have even more impact over the coming years, just like the fall in the living standards. I mean, that is, such things take time to germinate, but in the end, there are consequences.
Let me just remind the audience that they're very welcome to write questions in the chat to Konstantin, and I'll read them aloud and ask questions. But I have a whole bunch of questions. One of the things that we've seen is actually that Putin and Trump has been speaking to each other quite a lot. And the agreement with OPEC was actually sort of facilitated by Trump. What do you read into that?
Well, I think that Donald Trump was really worried about this price war, and he intervened. And I think that this whole settlement is due to Trump. I mean, it's not Putin who did it. It seems that the quid pro quo was not so much giving something to Putin, but let us say promising not to impose new sanctions on Putin. Because their original idea of the State Department and of the Treasury was to actually secure the Saudis' agreement to increase production or rather to lower production, was to promise more sanctions against Russian oil interests, which didn't happen. So in this respect, Trump was in control. Also, one has to remember, Putin, as for the whole Russian political class, Washington is everything. For them, the sun rises and sets in Washington, D.C., wherever they are. So talking to Trump in such circumstances actually boosts Putin's ego in some ways. And I think that for Trump, it's just part of a big agenda. He's not focused on Russia, he's more focused on China. But I think that the important thing, and you're coming back slightly towards what the state media is doing. There's one thing that the state media has been very, very careful to abide by. And that is not offending China. And Putin, as you know, a few days ago went public saying all these accusations against China are worthless and they are just a propaganda war and things like that. Well, I think that if you look at the number of memes appearing recently of Putin sucking up to Emperor Xi, that does not create a lot of good feeling towards China. The image of China has taken a hit everywhere in the world and in Russia too. And for Russia, it's a life and death issue, frankly speaking. So my feeling is that Putin's, this kind of love fest with Xi Jinping is going to be something that will reflect badly on him from now on, both inside the red walls of the Kremlin and outside in the wider world of politically active Russians. So I suppose that the hug China policy, it will be more difficult to pursue it in a sense that there's going to be a public discontent about that. And I also think that those who are serious about it, and you have to assume that there are elements of FSB and the army and so forth who are serious, and actually probably people in the economic segment of the government, they can't avoid looking at China and saying an issue, a challenge, if not outright danger. And I think that this will also be stewing somewhere there in the government. What I'm trying to say is don't expect immediate change. Again, unless the pandemic takes some very, very harsh turn. But this is something that weakened the regime. There's no doubt about that. Because it didn't live up to all the expectations, and some of its, the issues it was pushing very publicly turned out to be irrelevant. Like, no one talks about Ukraine anymore. One thing that nearly, not exactly disappeared, but its stage has been diminished on state television. It's Ukraine. Who cares what happens?
And that is
really, nobody cares about Kiev anymore. They don't care about Crimea anymore.
There's a question from the audience, from Peter Harbo, who says, thank you for very interesting views. What can we expect from Putin to do in Syria, Ukraine, the Baltics, less or more aggressive? So you were mentioning Ukraine, that nobody's actually speaking about Ukraine anymore.
The public opinion is not interested, but Putin is. Ukraine was, is, and will remain his number one priority. And I think that he's not doing more about undermining Ukraine now just because I don't think he really wants chaos he won't be able to handle. Syria, well, look, Syria is big in Western media. It's not very big in Russia. I think that recently people were not particularly happy with the expansion. Recently, I mean before COVID. People were not very happy about Putin's expansionist foreign policy and money being, that speaking about the falling incomes, about Russian bombs falling in Syria, and when you see it, you see like a money bag falling on Aleppo or whatever. But actually it doesn't cost much. Putin still can handle it. For him, keeping Assad in place is not an issue of keeping the Russian base or whatever. It's all about prestige. It's all about him being the ultimate go-to man in the world, the ultimate go-to specialist on countering regime change. That didn't change too. The Baltics. Well, I actually think that there is one, we don't know what goes on in Putin's mind, but there is one possibility. If he makes a judgment that the situation is such that he would like to distract population with a small victorious war, he may do something about the Baltic states. My personal scenario is not an all-out invasion, because to that NATO will react. But let me put it like that. A 40-minute incursion of the Russian Afghanistan veterans, quote unquote, avenging a rape of Russian girl in Narva, shooting a couple of Estonian policemen, tearing down Estonian flag, burning down the city hall, plastering a few Russian slogans on the walls and retreating across the river to Ivangorod. That's a possibility. Because we know what will happen after that. North Atlantic Council will meet, and it won't take 5 seconds before the usual suspects from the olive oil belt in the south and our good friends in Paris and Berlin will be saying, oh, we need to send an investigative mission headed by Heiko Maas to find out were these people really hooligans or some kind of Russian special forces, because we really don't know. And that will be the end of NATO. That will be the end of Article 5. That's a possibility. Probably not now, but I always keep it, personally, I always keep it in mind. And I think that this is a possibility in case Putin wants a distraction. He may misjudge everything. I may be wrong. And by the way, this is exactly the case where I would like to be wrong. But we don't know what his calculations are, because I do think he lives in a bubble where, as always in such circumstances, has a court which is afraid to tell him the whole truth.
So he might wag the dog, as we say, in terms of the Baltic, but in a way that we cannot imagine.
Belarus, same thing.
Yeah.
By the way, one thing that can happen is if COVID really makes a huge impact on Belarus, which it probably does. We speak to people in Belarus, and my wife is also a reporter, so she spoke recently to doctors in provincial Belarus. It's really bad. I think that when if Lukashenko cries uncle and asks for help, Putin may well say, oh yeah, well, no problem.
Yeah.
Just do me one favor, like the goldfish from Pushkin's tale. Grant me one wish. Adopt a ruble as your national currency, as I asked you several times before. And, help is on its way.
Yeah.
So that is a possibility.
And then there's a question from Carsten Fries, who's asking, could Putin reverse his strategy to obtain a herd immunity strategy? Would he reverse that?
He could.
Yeah.
In case he feels that the system is under huge strain, he may. I don't think it will be official. As I told you before, I think that there is an element of that, at least with regard to some segments of population. It's very Darwinian, very unethical and Christian in it. I think that if alcoholics of Magnitogorsk, if their numbers are suddenly reduced as a result of COVID-19, I don't think that a lot of people in the Kremlin will be shedding a lot of tears.
Yeah, a bit like the 90s, yeah. Will Putin be able to continue his renewal of the military as he, the whole military?
Oh, interesting. Good question. We didn't see anything about budgets. We don't know. Well, seemingly the army budget is there. I mean, it's another thing that Putin might want to have the army participate in helping out with fighting the pandemic. It didn't happen yet. There is no official, just like there is no official quarantine. Because in quarantine, and that's important, under Russian law, if you announce a state of emergency, all contracts are null and void. They are basically insured by the state. So the state takes full responsibility for the economy. Putin doesn't want that. He wants to help out his friends, the Rottenbergs, the Timchenkos, and so forth, the Sechens, but he doesn't want to help out. Also, that means really ultimate responsibility. That's why they are backing off. But they took 15,000 military personnel to Moscow to train for a parade, idiots. And all 15 are now infected.
Yeah.
So they had to evacuate them to their barracks. I think that what you already have a 50% herd immunity strategy. And they will never announce it. Or if it is announced, it's going to be someone else. I mean, then it's, the death of Stalin scenario. And a Khrushchev or a Beria or whatever, a Malenkov appears on TV and says, by the way, we can't handle it. You now have to survive. Because Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin really messed it up big time. Putin is not going to say it, but they may play it.
A student from St. Petersburg, Emil, is asking, how big an appetite for repression do you believe exists within the regime? How far will they go if demonstrations and the like become widespread in the future?
Thanks for the question. I was thinking about it, and I don't have a definitive answer. I think that the temptation is to use the situation as a pretext to repress and keep down more people. But there is a flip side to that. If you deploy your police forces to basically chase Navalny guys, they may not have the time to chase others who have to be chased, really. Number two, if there are disturbances that are prompted by either a disastrous medical situation, health situation, or by people revolting because they have nothing to eat and they have no jobs, local police forces will probably be, some of them will be reluctant to go against their own people. It's not an issue of bringing 200 OMON troops from Tula to beat up latte sipping, barbershop going, Camus reading hipsters in the center of Moscow, who are evidently a class enemy. It's another issue to face babushkas and to face angry workers. And I think that one of the reasons Putin is keeping the money back is because he feels that eventually he'll have to give it away in order to avoid exactly that situation. What I am sure of is that all the police surveillance techniques will be retained if and when the epidemic is over. But also, I think there is another flip side to that, and that is that opposition, people will be listening more and more to critics of the regime. They will be, the critics will be seen as people who are saying the truth, because the government lies. It lies always, but in times of crisis, it's always more sharp, such feeling. Do you really want to pursue very popular local critics? Depends. Depends on who these people are.
Klaus Reinhold asks, Putin first said that the pandemic was under control, then he backtracked and said that it was worse than expected. But during his Easter speech, he again said that everything was under control. The day after then, once again, he said that the number of infected in Russia would rise. How come this zigzag course?
Well, my understanding is that Putin is not given the harsh truths. It's, as always, le cour joue le roi. The court plays the king. And that's probably even more pronounced in the case of Lukashenko, who seems to be delusional. But Putin is not, every time there is a possibility, there's a drop in the number of, there is a number of infected people, but let's say it's less today than it was 2 days ago. So someone rushes to Putin and says, oh, well, you see, we had 5,000 yesterday, now we have 4. Putin uses it as an opportunity to speak and to say, oh, we're fighting back. And then things go down. I don't think that, and that is what gives me a suspicion that things are much, much worse. Because this zigzagging, this lack of strategy, means that there is no single decision-making center. There is no single decision-making center because no one wants to take decisions which are only Putin's. And no one wants to take decisions because no one wants to bring Putin information. If it was a good information, it was an information about manageability of this epidemic, people would have said that. They would have brought it in. They would have said, well, Vladimir Vladimirovich, we have enough of this, and it's going to be fine. It seems that he's fallen victim to his own negative selection of the last 15 years, where loyalty was your ticket to the ruling class. Is
it sort of Putin's Chernobyl?
Not yet, but I think that the rods are starting to melt. How long will they melt? How long will the reaction will be? I'm not sure. This is a country where desire for stability is very strong. And as long as Putin symbolizes stability, he'll be there. But I think that he'll be, look, I can't imagine him staying until 2036. I would even say that the discussion about 2024 will be much sharper than it was even 6 weeks ago. So things develop, and a lot of things play in here. For example, I don't know, what kind of line the administration is going to take, what kind of stupidity the GRU could do in I don't know, UK. Maybe they want to poison someone else again. What kind of situation may happen in some kind of Russian region where suddenly things may swing out of control. This is what we've seen, and I think that's basically the biggest lesson I so far draw from this crisis, that the system is much less strong, much weaker, much less flexible than it appeared. Also that the Russian people are patient and generally sound, in a sense that they do not make demands which they could have actually made. That works for Putin, but that also, I think, shows, and I would be watching mostly the ruling class, the elite. They, at least some of them, will draw a lesson. And those of them who are younger will probably be patient. But those that are young enough, like middle-aged, but will emerge from this crisis, and they will say, look, we can do it better than the granddad in the Kremlin. And we don't want to wait until 2036. That will be too long. We'll be old by that time. I think that what we should watch after that is how Putin will treat Sobyanin, for example, who emerged as basically the only person who talks to people, the only person who takes decisions. I mean, Sobyanin is a corrupt Putin stooge. But I mean, in the world of blind men, even a wide-eyed one is a one-eyed one is a treasure. So we should watch the dynamics inside the regime, and I think that we should watch public opinion polls. It's not for nothing that the presidential administration banned Vedomosti newspaper, the only remaining newspaper today, from publishing Levada-Center polls. Okay. Which means that I'm afraid that public opinion is going to turn in a very unpleasant and is going to have a very negative turn for them.
Konstantin, thank you so much for enlightening us. We'll be following closely the developments in a neighborhood in Russia, and I look forward to talking to you again. So take care, and good luck in everything in your work.
Thank you very much. Thanks a million, everyone. Sorry I didn't answer all the questions. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.